You might remember Rollie Fingers as a menacing presence on the mound, but Rollie was a straight-up menace away from the field too. He would fight fans, opposing players, teammates, and owners. Rollie didn't care who it was. He was going to do things his way. From the outside, Fingers appeared to be a pretty jovial guy with his trademark handlebar mustache and frequent smile. But Raleigh grew up in a tough Ohio steel town full of two beer bars. That means the bars were so tough you ordered two bottles of beer at a time, one to drink and one to fight with. It was only fitting that he ended up with the Oakland A's. This was a team that hated just about everybody from the hot dog vendor to the notoriously cheap A's owner, Charlie O. Finley. But who they hated the most was each other. It's hard to explain how much of a circus this Oakland team was in the mid-70s. They had a mule who even went on road trips and stayed in the hotel. They had a scoreboard that didn't post scores from around the league because Finley refused to pay the $350 a month for the feed. They even had a 14-year-old executive vice president who had started as a ball boy just 3 years earlier. He was the eyes and ears of Finley and eventually was nicknamed Pipeline because he ratted out so many players. Young Stanley Burrell had another nickname because of his strong resemblance to Hank Aaron. He was known as Lil Hammer. Later, when he started DJing at clubs while on road trips, he added another moniker, and for the rest of his life, he would be known as MC Hammer. This was the clubhouse Raleigh was dropped into when he was just 22. He'd never seen anything like it. The catcher hated the right fielder. The first baseman hated the shortstop. The center fielder hated the left fielder. The only thing this team agreed on was they all hated the owner. There were so many clubhouse fights that the team became known as the Swingin' A's. But maybe more teams should think about fighting in the clubhouse because there was one more thing this team hated: losing. And they didn't lose much, winning the World Series every year from 1972 to 1974. 1974 was also the year that there was a full-scale brawl in the clubhouse. It all started when the left fielder Billy North Sucker punched superstar Reggie Jackson in the mouth. From there, it was on like Donkey Kong. By the time the smoke had cleared, it looked like a tornado had ripped through the clubhouse. In its wake, Jackson was left with an injured shoulder from being thrown into a locker. Vita Blue, who was supposed to start the game that day, got his foot stepped on. But the worst of it was reserved for catcher Ray Fosse, who was just trying to play peacemaker and ended up leaving on a stretcher. Before the first game of the 1974 World Series against the Dodgers, it was Raleigh's turn to get in on the act. Raleigh, who was in the middle of his first of 3 divorces, was approached by pitcher Blue Moon Odom, who asked him, "Who's leaving tickets for your wife's boyfriend?" Fingers went after Odom and a short brawl ensued, stopping only when Raleigh was knocked into a locker, receiving a cut on the back of his head that required 6 stitches to close. Maybe if Charlie Finley hadn't been so cheap, he would have added padding outside the lockers. But Raleigh got his share of licking too. Odom picked up a sprained ankle that saw him walk with a noticeable limp for the rest of the series. But the fightin' A's saved some fight for the field too. They beat the LA Dodgers 4-1, with Odom picking up the win in the Game 5 clincher and Raleigh getting the save. Maybe they should fight before every series. What do you think? Did Blue Moon Odom go too far, or should Raleigh have just let it go and worried about the World Series? Let us know in the comments section if you'd be throwing hands or turning the other cheek. Speaking of fighting, Cardinals outfielder Curt Flood took Major League Baseball to court challenging the reserve clause in every player's contract. The reserve clause meant that whatever team signed you was the one you were stuck with until they cut, traded, or sold you. That system sounds vaguely familiar, but I can't quite put my finger on it. When Flood won his case, all players not under a multi-year contract were set to become free agents after the 1976 season. Charlie Finley attempted to beat them to the punch and attempted to sell Fingers and Joe Rudi to the Boston Red Sox for $1 million each, and Vita Blue to the New York Yankees for $1.5 million in June. However, Commissioner Bowie Kuhn, who was always fighting with Finley, nullified the sale, stating that the transactions were not in the best interests of baseball. You won't be surprised to learn Finley sued Kuhn. What might surprise you is what he did next. He benched Fingers, Rudi, and Blue, saying that they were members of other teams and did not play for the A's anymore. But the Swingin' A's weren't putting up with Finley's crap this time. The entire team threatened to strike against Finley if they stayed on the bench. With Finley staring at the prospect of forfeiting games and all that juicy revenue for the last 3 months of the season, Charlie blinked first and allowed the three to play again. But that was the last straw for all three players who were so over Finley's antics it wasn't even funny. They beat feet out of Oakland, and the next season Fingers was a Padre, Rudy was an Angel, and the next season Mr. October was off to Baltimore. After spending 4 seasons with the Padres and 4 seasons with the Brewers, Rollie was offered a contract by Reds manager Pete Rose to come and play in Cincinnati. While Rollie was excited to play for Rose, he wasn't excited about the prospect of playing for the one owner in baseball who was worse than Charlie Finley. Of course, I'm talking about famously racist and Nazi memorabilia collector Marge Schott. The straw that broke the camel's back was when Schott declared Fingers must shave off his mustache in order to adhere to the Reds' policy of no facial hair. Rollie, who by this time was even more cantankerous, responded, "Well, you tell Marge Schott to shave her St. Bernard, and I'll shave my mustache." He was referring to Schott's St. Bernard, Shotzi. The dog was even more hated than the owner, and that's a high bar, because the dog was allowed to go everywhere, always leaving dog hair, and worse, everywhere, including the food in the clubhouse. Fingers decided he didn't want to spend the last years of his career dodging dog poop and a racist owner, choosing instead to just retire. A baller to the end, he invited her to stick her offer where the sun don't shine. Of course, Rollie wasn't just known for getting in fight and pissing people off. But before we get into his career highlights, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and drop a comment letting us know if you still feel the same way about him after watching this video. Roland Glenn Fingers was born on August 25, 1946, and his path to the majors was already mapped out before the doctor slapped him on the butt. By the way, that doctor was the last person who slapped Rollie and didn't end up with a black eye. His dad, Michael, was a hard-living, hard-drinking steel mill worker who once roomed with Stan Musial when he was in the St. Louis Cardinals minor league system. He was determined that his son would live out his derailed major league dreams. One day, after coming home from yet another brutal day at the steel mill, announced that the family would be pulling up stakes in Ohio and moving to California. This was great news for young Rollie, who could now play baseball year-round in sunny Southern California. It didn't up as well for his father, who, after struggling to find work, ended up taking a job at the local steel mill. After a stellar high school career at Upland High School, Rollie decided to give college a shot and enrolled at nearby Chaffee Junior College. Unfortunately, he quickly discovered he hated college, almost as he hated jokes about his wife and racist owners. He pulled the plug after just 1 semester, deciding he didn't need to know a damn thing about the Gettysburg Address in order to throw a curveball. The Dodgers offered Fingers a $20,000 bonus to sign with them. At first, Rollie was thrilled. After all, in 1964, you could buy a pretty nice house for $20,000. But very soon he realized he might never get to the majors with the Dodgers. After all, LA already had Don Drysdale and Sandy Koufax in their rotation, plus a farm system full of young phenoms. Would you be surprised to know Rollie turned down their offer? Instead, he signed with the then Kansas City Athletics for $13,000 on Christmas Eve 1964. The next season, he reported to the Leesburg A's, a Class A team in the Florida League. At first, the A's couldn't decide whether to make him a pitcher or an outfielder, but after watching batters swing and miss against his nasty pitches, they decided the mound would be his permanent home. In those days, every pitcher was a starter. The bullpen was reserved for the old guys who had lost the zip off their fastball or otherwise couldn't cut it in the rotation. Rollie was no different. He spent 4 years in the minor leagues and was a starter in every game he pitched. However, his path to the majors wasn't always smooth sailing. On minor league opening day 1967 in Birmingham, just 9 days after he married his high school sweetheart Jill, the Upland High School team statistician and future object of Blue Moon Odom's questionable comedy, a hit baseball struck Fingers in the face, breaking his cheekbone, jaw, and knocking out some teeth. After 5 weeks with his jaw wired shut, Rollie returned to the team more determined than ever to make it to the big leagues. A lot of people would have given up after an injury like that, but not Rollie. If anything, it just made him meaner. He finally got his shot in 1968 making his big league debut on September 15th against Detroit in the old Tiger Stadium. Taking the mound in the fourth inning of a game the A's were already losing badly, Rollie proceeded to throw more gasoline on the fire. He gave up 4 runs on 4 hits, including a home run to Bill Freehan, a walk, a wild pitch, and a hit batter all in just an inning and a third. Despite his disastrous debut and an ERA of 27.8, he was in the majors to stay. Over the next 4 seasons, Fingers bounced back and forth between the starting rotation and the bullpen. But gradually, A's manager Dick Williams saw the value of having someone in the pen who could come into the game in the 7th, 8th, or 9th inning and preserve the win. Williams rightly figured that with a guy like that, the A's could effectively shorten the games by giving their opponents fewer innings to score. Eventually, Rollie was moved into the closer role, and after 1973, he never made another start in the majors. But other teams took note and tried to duplicate the A's success. Soon, every team in baseball was using a pitcher dedicated only to saving games when their team had a lead. And these weren't the usual slugs and misfit toys that used to be in the bullpens. These guys were real pitchers. He was traded to the Padres before the 1977 season, but despite picking up 108 saves in 4 seasons for the Friars, San Diego managed only 1 winning season, going 84-78 in 1978 and finishing 4th in the National League Western Division. He finished up his career with 4 years in Milwaukee and had arguably his best season in 1981, winning the AL MVP after posting a 1.04 ERA, recording 27 saves, and helping Harvey's Wallbangers make their first playoff appearance in franchise history. Rollie retired after the 1985 season at age 38 and was inducted into the MLB Hall of Fame in 1991. He leaves behind an almost unmatched legacy. After all, very few players can say they invented a new position and helped revolutionize a sport that's been around since 1846. If you ever get the chance to meet him, shake his hand and congratulate him on a great career. Just don't say anything about his wife.